It's really great to be here today. Thanks so much for having me. Like Zishan mentioned, it's been a little bit more than 4 years or something since I've given a talk like this. So if I'm a little bit rusty, I guess that's your problem. I'll do my best. I really want to say that before I dive into the meat of this talk, that this has been really, this has been a really interesting experience so far. I'm going to talk about a little bit about, sort of like why I decided to pitch this talk to this conference, which might seem a little out of place, a little bit like different or left field than maybe what you were expecting. But I did have the experience sitting up in the balcony, heckling Edwin during his talk a little bit, that reminded me of like why we do this to begin with, in order to get exposure to things that we normally wouldn't get exposed to, in order to exchange, germs and pheromones with other human beings in a constructive setting where we all feel safe and secure in the knowledge that we're here for like a similar purpose toward a similar end. And though what I'm about to talk about is really different from what everyone else is talking about, I hope that you will draw a line from wherever you're at, whatever your experiences are, whatever got you here, instead of thinking like, do less of that, and try to, draw that line. I'm really interested to hear how that works out. Okay, so let's jump in. The hardest problem in computer science, what do they say that, the two hardest problems in computer science, cache invalidation and naming things, and then the joke version, cache invalidation, naming things, and off by one errors. That's a good joke, right? We all like that joke. And we all know that saying. And we also all know that good talks, they start, I think, with good provocations, right? Things that get you thinking. And I like to front load mine, put it right on the title slide. And it says the hardest problem in computer science is marketing. And since I'm pretty good at marketing and, I've packed like kind of the whole point of the talk and everything you need to know right into the title slide, I think they're pretty good, but that was supposed to be a joke. But since I've got another 20 something minutes or so to go, I want to unpack it for you. And, if it is so hard, there's good news. I think I can help you with that. I think I can help us all get better at it and understand why we want to. But why am I here? I hinted at that in the beginning of my like off script portion of the talk, but I haven't given a talk in 4 years. This topic isn't as on topic as a lot of the other things were, but I was inspired by this phrase, the future of computing. This is the future of computing conference. Like, I love the audacity of that. That's just great. That's what we're here for. That's what we're interested in. And like, we're all here. Like, okay, I'm on board, and, Causal Islands, I was going to make a casual islands joke, but it got taken yesterday, but you can laugh anyway. It's a great name. And this is good marketing, really. I mean, whoever wrote this or pushed this, you're doing a pretty good job. It's a good phrase, and that's a big part of what inspired me to look more into this, because I wasn't that familiar with a lot of these aspects of Fission's areas of expertise and stuff. I've been learning a lot this week, but that's what got me here, that phrase. And then seeing the community pop up and form around the conference and seeing familiar faces involved, I got reminded of those like early days in my career as a computologist, RubyConfs and Strange Loops and these conferences where you would go and you got to find something to do. You end up sitting in a talk. You have no idea what it is. And you learn a thing. You get exposed to something that you never thought you would. And that's why I'm here, surrounding myself with all of you beautiful people for the first time in so long, just to think about the future. And, I have some ideas about what the future of computing will look like, but only a few. And I'm going to wait till the end of the talk to talk about that, because there's some things I want to get into before that. And how I think I can help us get to the future. That's kind of like what this talk is about, because I think that the future of computing depends on good marketing. It doesn't depend on like paid advertising and a lot of like bullshit, but it depends on good marketing. And you're probably wondering, like, you said you're here because of the future of computing. What's futuristic about marketing? Like, I think we need to be effective communicators if we want to usher in this future. And as I was watching Brooklyn's talk earlier, which I thought was really interesting, that's something that I was thinking a lot about. I was like, yeah, we need this. Yeah, we need this. But like, how are we going to communicate to anyone who's not in this room that we need it or why we need it? Because they don't know what a casual island is. And I guess they should. So that effective application, the application of effective communication in the context of selling products, or even in the context of academic or open source communities, that's just called marketing. That's all marketing is. So the more people like you who innovate and have big ideas, the more we get good at effectively communicating about those ideas, the sooner the future will come and the easier it will be for us to explain to people why they need these things that we've been spending all our time on. And like I said, serendipitously, I have a lot of experience with this. I've spent the last several years helping smart people like you with this exact problem. And so I figured that that's the best way that I can help, by giving you all as much of the foundational information as possible that you need to be able to effectively communicate about your big idea. So that's what I'm going to call this throughout this talk, your big idea. And that's going to be like a catch-all. If you're trying to sell your thing, if you're just trying to get people to use your thing, if you're just trying to explain your thing, it's your big idea, right? This is not all about crass commercialism and selling and turning software into products, though of course that's the end that a lot of this is used for. And if you can get good at marketing, you can get good at selling software. But if you can get good at effective communication, you can get good at explaining your ideas. And soon you'll find that other people will be doing the work for you, and that other people will come up with better explanations. And that's the power of community. That's why we want people to use our stuff to begin with. So what have I been doing the last 5 years or so? I haven't been out in public talking about it much. Basically, just to give a quick recap, in 2016, after several stints in technical and non-technical roles at startups, my partner Brian Dole and I started a company called Reify. It's a marketing consultancy for high-tech software companies. Since we've started, we've worked with over 100 companies. And we've gathered a lot of data, which is a fancy way of saying that we've tried our best to learn from our mistakes. And our idea was pretty simple. We had both met so many people with so many amazing big ideas during our roles in startups, but there was an issue. They weren't effective communicators. Often what was holding them back from getting help was something that I noticed that was like the insight for why we started this consultancy, was that if you're a software founder or someone trying to get help with marketing, you hire a marketing agency and they don't know what the hell you're talking about. They don't know what a cloud is. They don't know, anything about the foundational elements of what you're talking about. So what happens is, technical founders, technical people with big ideas, they hire marketers and they hate it because they burn themselves out trying to explain what they do to this very well-intentioned marketer who's probably quite good at their job. They just don't have a background in computer science. And so my partner and I had both been engineers, and we thought, let's go for it. Let's see if we can like do what we've been doing at the companies that we've worked for as many different companies as we can. And I think it's worked out pretty well. And the way that we explain it is this. You know, this is what people used to think. If you build it, it'll be awesome. And people will just start using it, and you put it on the internet, and you put a price on it, and that's how you get people to use things, right? Except not, because if you don't tell them about it, if you don't communicate effectively about it, they're not going to come. They're not going to try your product or your big idea. It won't go anywhere. And that's fine if that's what you want. I do all kinds of creative things. I write, I make music. Sometimes I put it in a drawer. Sometimes I try to share it, right? Like, we should all be cool with that. There's nothing wrong with doing things for yourself. But I know how frustrating it can be to have a big idea that you're very convinced will make people's lives better in some way or solve some specific problem. And you know that what's getting in the way of adoption of that big idea is not the quality of the idea or the implementation of the idea. It's simply that you can't get anyone to listen. You don't know where to go. Who are you talking to, and what are you trying to tell them? These basic foundations are what this talk is all about. And so what has made our work so impactful at Reify is, since my partner and I were both engineers, we know what you do already for the most part. You're going to have to explain some nuances of your domain, but the basic aspect of that is like taken off the table. So you don't have to explain your idea and then go through this other process. That's where we come from. That's how I gathered all of the information that I'm presenting to you today by doing this over 100 times in the last 6 or 7 years. And so I'm going to try to teach you a compressed version of what we do with most of these clients that we work with in order to get them from where they're at, which is they have a big idea, to where they want to be, which is they're capable of communicating about that idea in an effective manner. Does anyone have any questions? Like, does everyone know what I mean by effective communication? Is that clear, or can we get some nods? You know, it's like, yeah, you got it? Okay, so it's like, I tell you the thing, you're like, I get the thing, cool. And then you have a conversation about the thing. That's pretty much what I'm talking about. Easier said than done. So because it's important to give your consulting framework an important sounding name so that you can do important work for important clients, we call ours the value story framework marketing. It's called this because, given that the hardest part about spreading your big idea is communicating about it, if we believe that's true, then the most important thing to communicate is the value of your idea. That's what it's all about. I was making like a V with my fingers for some reason, the value of your idea, but that's what it's all about. That's what you really want to communicate to someone. Right? You want to get them hooked on like the why. Why does it matter to me? What have you done for me lately? Like, sure, I'll go download your thing, but like, why? Right? And the most effective way to communicate is via a story. We tell stories all the time. That's what spreads ideas. That's what spreads products and everything else. Humans are extremely story-driven people. We like to know things in context in order to make decisions about them. And the best way to capture these complex foundational ideas is via a framework. So that's what it's called, but how does it work? So the way that it works is that to get from your big idea to this grail of effective communication, it happens in 3 steps. First, there's the why, where we document your big idea, its origin story, and the problem statement that it's meant to address. Then we move on to the who, which is, given this big idea and the value of it, who is the initial audience that you're trying to communicate with. And we're going to talk a little bit more about how specific we need to be when we talk about who, because we can't just say people that use computers or software engineers or even really back-end engineers or front-end engineers. These terms used to mean more specific things. Now they're much more general. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that level of specificity. And then we're going to move on from the who to the how. So that this how, the last part, is what most people think about when they think about marketing and advertising. They think about like, I'm in an episode of Mad Men and I'm like drinking vodka and like saying inappropriate things and we're just like shooting cool ideas back and forth and like, bam, that's how Think Different happened or whatever. But it's not like that. I wish it was, but it's really not. And so throughout, like I said, I might call your big idea your product accidentally, but know that what I mean is I know you all have cool ideas that you want other people to know more about, and that's the thing that I'm talking about, whether you're trying to sell it or not. And so another thing to note just about these stages is that all three have inputs and outputs, and I'm going to show you like roughly what they are on the slides, and that's why this text is so poorly aligned on this slide. The inputs are going to be data or things you're gonna write down basically, and the outputs are just going to be refined versions of those inputs. But we're going to talk about what you need to know and what you can expect to happen because you did that stage. So let's start with the why. Your story. The input is a questionnaire, basically, that you'll fill out about your backstory, how you arrived at your big idea, what you've learned about it so far, your problem statement, and more. And the output will be just documentation of that for the first stage. Sit down. We have a questionnaire. You can download it on our blog. Fill it out. It's going to ask you all kinds of questions that you may or may not have asked yourself about your big idea. And it will give you probably some pause about how well refined this idea is. We all know the very important role that documentation plays in conveying the intent of software. So similarly, we should take an approach to documenting the idea itself. And that's really what this first stage is all about. So we start with you, how you got there. And the big question we're trying to establish, the baseline, is essentially like, why you? What makes you uniquely suited to address the problem you're addressing? And this is the important thing. What is the problem? What are you helping people with? What is this thing intended to accomplish? What did you notice that needed changing in the world? What rabbit did you chase? What hole did you chase them down? Toward what end? How lost did you get? Write it all down. We start with you because if you don't have an authentic connection to this big idea, you will not be able to effectively communicate about it. And this is because effective communication relies on authenticity, especially when it comes to new ideas that you're trying to expose people to. Because we've all heard things that sound too good to be true because they are. And that doesn't happen when you're real with your problem statement and all of these other things. So, and an interesting thing happens when we do this client work with companies and there's like multiple founders, multiple people involved. We ask them all to do this documentation on their own, and then we come back and compare their results. And we do that for each of the three stages. For the documentation component, for the story, for the persona, which is the next stage, and for messaging, we ask the group to do their homework on their own, and then we come back and we discuss. And this amazing thing happens where, believe it or not, sometimes two executives at a software company think they're doing two completely different things. And it's a really good idea to get that out of the way like early on in this engagement that we do with them, where we're telling them, you're going to pay us money to help you come up with all of these words that you're going to use to communicate to your potential audience. And y'all are working at cross purposes right now. And you need to solve that problem before we can move on. Because if you're not on the same page about this problem, you're not going to be on the same page about the next part, which is really important. And that's your ideal audience. And so in order to figure out who your ideal audience is, who your target persona is, you're going to fill out a list of questions from the point of view of the ideal user of this big idea. And the output you're going to get is a refined persona profile, basically like a one-pager that anyone should be able to look at and get a good idea of who you're trying to communicate with. And now that we've gotten that problem statement written down, we can move on to these people, right? The target persona. And we use different questionnaires with different folks who are trying to sell different things, but basically, I'm going to show you some examples in the next slide, but I just want to address one thing, which is that in the course of your own work, you may have experienced this idea before of like a persona or ideal customer profile or something like that. Raise your hand if you've ever tried to do something like that before. Okay, good. A lot of you. That's great. And sometimes they're good, and sometimes they're really dumb, right? Like Jane, the Java programmer, lives in Berkeley. She takes Bart to work, and she orders her matcha oat latte at Starbucks. Okay, like that's awesome. What does that have to do with your software, right? And if that doesn't matter, then what does matter, I guess, is a good question. And it's really straightforward. You just need to focus on the problems that they're facing, that your big idea is intended to help with. And you know, the problems they face, they should align with that problem you're solving, right? And if you're talking about, you know, front-end TypeScript developers who work on heavily regulated products, as an example, that's like a pretty good, right? We have like front end. We know we're writing a TypeScript thing for some reason, and then maybe it's some security related thing. So like only people who are in tightly regulated industries would care about that. Can we all see how like that's a much better definition of our profile than front end developer, right? Or Jane, the Java programmer, or whomever that is. We're not selling we're not selling consumer products, right? I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. Like, it's not a can of Coke. You're not going to get someone to just like buy your thing off of 3 words. You know, like there's no one who's super hot in the desert and, you know, they need a beverage so bad. And, you know, you need a good tagline to get them to choose your beverage over the other. That's like, no. It's much more complicated than that. And so that's the whole reason you're pursuing this big idea to begin with, is to solve a specific problem for a specific type of person. And that's who we're trying to find the audience for. And yeah, we're just trying to find who they are and where we can find them and who faces that problem. And like I said, along the way, we document other essential characteristics of this abstract individual. Here are some good questions. What type of company do they work for? Like what industry in? How many employees does that company have? Do they work in a specific industry vertical? Those are like firmographic questions, questions about the type of firm they work for. And then there's demographic questions. Do they need a certain level of experience in order to get value out of your big idea? What are the biggest problems that they face, right? Maybe in this TypeScript, whatever example, it's some encryption thing, and encryption is super hard, and this makes it easy, right, as an example. And what type of tools do they use and skills do they have? And the tools that they use is really interesting. It gets glossed over. It's an important thing to think about. If you want people to use your stuff, you have to know what other stuff they use, right? Because it might not be compatible with their stuff, right? And people are not quick to drop their own stuff and use yours, right? It's not easy to get people to do that. And so you have to be quite persuasive in order to get anyone to even care at all what's below the fold on your marketing website, right? And so you got to take this seriously. We don't just want VPs of engineering at mid-sized companies. We don't want something that can be reduced to a LinkedIn search or some other targeted search on a paid social platform. Not good enough. Not going to work. You have to get the foundations correct. And here's another thing that we use, because it's like hard to overstate how wrong so many people get this crucial stage of understanding how to communicate about their big ideas. It's like you can't overstate it. People are building things right now with massive funding, and they have no idea about any of this stuff, right? And so here's a rubric. You can use it to help you figure out who you want to talk to like first is a good use of this rubric. So maybe you're not sure, do we want to try to communicate with the person who's going to buy this software or the person who's going to use the software? Do we need to talk to the manager of the people that manages the people who are going to use the software, et cetera? So you fill out this rubric, and you should be really confident about most of these questions. I know what problem we're solving. We have a unique value prop. Targeting this persona will represent a sizable enough total addressable market. Sorry for some marketing jargon in there. Targeting this persona is compatible with our go-to-market strategy, like how we distribute our software to begin with. And we can communicate authentically with this persona, and we know how to find this persona, and we can reach prominent examples. This last one is like hugely important. Where are they? This is getting harder to answer now, right? It used to be Twitter was so good for hitting, like you knew you could hit anyone on there, right? And we can't rely on that platform anymore. I mean, I'm not even on there. I don't even think Jen tweets anymore. So like, what are you even on there for, right? What's that? Scoots. Yeah. Oh, right. Scoots. Right. So, right. Blue Sky, fascinating, somewhat out of scope, but you understand the idea, right? It's not there yet, right? It's not, if that would not be the answer to the question. If you asked me 8 years ago, how do you get every nerd to know about your thing? Tweet about it, right? It's a lot harder now for a lot of reasons. Okay, so that's a pretty good amount of stuff about the who, right? So we started with the why, and then we moved on to the who. And I just want to be clear, you can go and do this for yourself. That's what this whole thing is about. I have all of the materials for all of these questionnaires. Everything is on our website. Go do it for yourself. Please, tell me that you did it and that it was awesome, or that you hated it and you didn't understand it. This is not about getting you to like hire me to help you with this. This is about getting you to do this for yourself. Okay? I don't want to help all of you. I don't have enough time. Okay? I'm getting old. I don't want to be on my computer for the rest of my life. So y'all are going to have to get good at this because I need a break. Okay? So let's move on. So now we're going to move on to messaging. And the inputs are a list of these things that we call supporting examples, which I'll talk to you about in a little while. And the output is a messaging framework. And that framework will contain all of the words necessary to effectively communicate about your big idea. Pretty cool, right? And this last part is what most people probably think about when they think about marketing, playing Mad Men like I talked about earlier. And it's the most fun part because it's all about getting a stranger oriented to your big idea in the smallest amount of time possible. And that's a great challenge, right? All we want is for someone to want to know more. Okay? With a big technical idea, you can't communicate the whole thing all at once. So you have to start small. And this is an example of a messaging framework. It's fictional, and actually this is something that I wrote as a joke like 5 years ago, but it was unintentionally prophetic, because you can basically do this now, right? This is my token mention of LLMs in this talk. It's apparently mandatory. This is for a fictional product called Whisper Code, and the idea was you would whisper to your computer what you wanted it to do, and it would write all of your code for you, which is so fucked up that you can actually do this now. But anyway, and so believe it or not, the end product of all of this work, documenting your story, doing your persona work, being super certain, filling out rubrics, doing this messaging step, it all boils down to this. It's not a lot. This is very little, right? Everything you've worked on, all of the history, all of the sweat and blood, it can be boiled down to this few words. And what's interesting here is what's not on this page, right? Because you will always have way more to say than what's here, but you're not allowed to have more than what's here. This is what you're limited to. And, as someone, with a big idea who isn't necessarily like ruthlessly adept at ruthlessly cutting words, this might frighten you a little bit, but as a recovering poet and marketer, this delights me. There's nothing better to me than just crossing out all of your extra words. You're just, no, shut up. Too much, right? You don't need more than this. Okay? You don't need more than this. Let's talk about it a little bit. So the top, this is the thing, this is again, what most people think about, a tagline. They need a tagline, right? We're going to talk about that in a little bit. So this one is, never write a line of code again, right? And if you're me, or like me, you'd be like, yeah, tell me more. I want to know how. Okay, and so that's what the brand promise is all about, the thing at the top of this framework. It's actually the part that you write last. Okay, that's a big inversion that most people don't get. You don't sit around trying to come up with some smart sounding tagline and then fill in the rest. It does not work that way. You start at the bottom of this framework, which is a big list of stuff that you already know about your big idea. That's what these supporting examples are. They're examples that support the claims that are made in this framework. So in this framework, I'm telling you that this product called Whisper Code is 3 things. It's fast, it's easy, and it's secure. And so if I said to you, Whisper Code is fast, and you said to me, well, what's the value of that to me? And I have my smart ass way of saying, well, no code is faster than Whisper Code, right? Meaning this is the fastest possible way that you could get your code written. And I'm like, yeah, I'm like, really? Like that, are you sure? Like, can you back that claim up? And those are the supporting examples. So programs used to take hours. Now they take seconds. If your program isn't perfect, simply ask us for another one. It will probably be better. And no more thinking about whether or not you can or even should. It's that fast, right? So these are just me coming up with stupid ways to try to support the claim that this is fast. And hopefully this illustrates to you at least a little bit about how this framework works. The idea is that you're taking all of the value statements that you have and you're writing them all down. So you're going to get together or do it separately, like I mentioned, with you and the other folks involved in your big idea, and you're going to write down as many supporting examples as you can. These are things that are going to get people interested in, wanting to know more, all of the cool things about your big idea, right? Like, I could write down like 100 of these about the fission work that Brooklyn presented this morning, right? There's so many benefits, right? And this is not to criticize that talk in the context of a highly technical conference. That was just the correct right amount of detail for this context. But if you were to try to extract just like something like this from all of that big pictures work that was presented, you will start to see the challenge that people have when they're attempting to effectively communicate about their big idea. What do you talk about first? There's so many cool things to talk about, right? And we can do all these things anonymously, decentralized. You know, I know who I'm trusting. I know who I'm not trusting. You know, is it about that? Is it about scalability? Is it about getting the 50 million people in the circle who don't have access to the internet? Like, where do we start? It can be confounding because it's so much easier to build software and pile on your big ideas than it is to take a step back and do this work to make sure that you're communicating about what really matters. And so what happens is we ask people to make these big lists of these supporting examples, and we refine them with them. We look at them. Here's a pretty interesting graphic that I made a while ago to try to like visualize the whole process. So it's about personas and messaging, but this middle part is basically about how we take all of these supporting examples, and if you had like 3 or 4 people who are on the big idea and they each come up with 50 examples, even in those cases where people are, you know, working toward cross purposes and maybe like it seems like they're divergent, like most of the time they'll still come up with mostly all of the same supporting examples, and there'll be some differences, and it's great. We sit down, we talk about them, and what we do is we do a kill, keep, combine on them, which means we cross out ones we know we don't like, we circle ones we know we think we like, and we combine like ones, and we iteratively do that until we have a sort of, you know, canonical list. And then we look at that list and we look for patterns in that list, right? That's where fast and easy and secure came from, because the maybe 50 examples that preceded this framework, maybe there's like 20 of them that were about how fast it was, and 15 of them about how easy it was, and 10 of them about how secure it was, and 8 of them about how something else it was, right? So basically, like, you're gonna come up with 5 or 6 categories, but you can only choose 3. So you need to make sure that those 3 work together and tell as much of the story as possible to communicate the essential value just to that one specific audience that you're trying to communicate with. And you don't get 4. There's never 4 columns. There's never 4 supporting examples, or 5 or 2. There's always 3 groups of 3. Don't ask me why. Okay? But this has we have never compromised this once. I've literally done this 100 times, and every single framework we've produced has been 3 groups of 3. You don't need more. Yeah, but like, do I need more? No. No. Whoever you are, no. I'm telling you, no, you don't. No, 3 groups of 3. Here's another way of saying it. If you only had 9 things to say about your big idea, those are the 9 supporting examples that end up on your framework. And ones that don't fit into the categorization don't belong there, right? There is a lot of value in creative constraint in these types of situations where effective communication is the goal. Say less. I should take that advice. And so from this refinement, that's how you get from a big list to a smaller list, categorized lists, etc. And that's how you get from a big mess to something like this that's really concise. by being really hard on yourself and by not letting yourself exceed these constraints. And it is hard, but it's easier than you think, and it's a lot easier when you have a framework to do it with. And that's why I really felt like this is something that I could hopefully get some of you to be more interested in to do for yourselves. I can't teach you everything in this short period of time. Good. All right. So the only other aspect of the framework is essentially like you move up, you do the supporting examples, you do the headline benefits, which are the benefit statements for those. You write an elevator pitch. I don't want to dig too much into it. You can check this out on your own later. I hope that you will. But the elevator pitch is really just comes from those stuff below it on the framework, and I'm going to show you a better application of that in a second. And I just wanted to highlight something like how you come up with your good brand promise is really difficult. I mean, it's really challenging. I'm not going to make it sound like it's something that's going to come to you easily. I wanted to show you these two examples to compare and contrast. On the left, you have a consumer product, which is like high-end luxury watch, Patek Philippe, like the greatest watchmaker of all time. And they have an amazing tagline. It says, begin your own tradition, right? On the upper left. Yeah, begin your own tradition. And then this tagline is just the greatest. You never actually own a Patek Philippe. You merely look after it for the next generation. What? That's like a once in a lifetime. This guy got like a fat gold watch for writing that. That's just like, what? But you see that like everyone gets that, right? And like anyone would understand, I think, what that means. That kind of message does not work for selling your serverless database, right? Okay, so we're like, we don't get to have as much fun as someone who's marketing like, high-end watches and, horological expertise, but, PlanetScale is the world's most advanced serverless MySQL platform. That's really good, okay? I didn't write that. I helped write it, but I didn't write it all on my own. But someone else came up with this. So I'm giving someone else credit. That's really good. You get exactly, you're like, okay, I want to know more about that. Advanced, serverless, MySQL platform. Like, okay, I get it. I'm probably going to want to try more, or learn more, or get started, or whatever the button says. Okay, I need some water. I've given you a fast-paced introduction so far for how we get from your big idea to how to communicate about it effectively. We started with the problem. We moved to the audience, talked about value propositions and brand promises and the messaging framework. And how do you use it, though, is an interesting question that we get a lot. Like, now what? How do we apply this? Because it's not the beginning. I mean, it's not the end. When you make your framework, it's the beginning, right? Like, you have this framework. Now you can go talk about it, okay? That you didn't do anything yet except, the work for yourself. You haven't tested any of this yet. You haven't outwardly communicated. You're not communicating until you're talking about it or putting it out in public for someone else to see. And so the first thing that we do is we take their framework and we turn it into a landing page with them, right? So this is a Google Doc wireframe fake web page that you can look at and see, right, where all of this stuff came from. The H1 is the brand promise. The three sections below the fold, there's one for each pillar. The H3 that titles each of those sections is just the headline benefit for that pillar. The text underneath those, the text boxes underneath each of those are the supporting examples that back up that headline benefit. And believe it or not, straight up copying your framework into a format like this is an excellent way to get your first prototype expression of this big idea communication thing out there. That's pretty much all you have to do. right? I mean, you need to add things like buttons, and I don't think this works as a web page. Like, I think there's, coding to do to turn it into an actual web page, you know what I mean? But that's the easy part, right? And so this is where we end with most of our clients that we do the foundations work with. We go through all that whole process with them. We create the messaging framework. We get feedback. We turn it into a web page. They ship it, and then they're on their way, right? We used to just hand off the framework and suggest that they use that to make a landing page, but we don't do that anymore because they just didn't do that. So now you can only hire us to do your messaging framework work if you are going to ship this landing page, right? So we give you you need to be like, okay, I want that too. And still a lot of people don't ship them, believe it or not, but we're getting better. It's hard. Shipping web pages is very challenging. I would never want to have to do that. And what's great about this site, you get your artifact, right? You get your link. You get your ability to share. And that's the important concrete output, I think, of all of this work. So we started with the problem statement, defined our persona, came up with our messaging, and shipped a web page in 46 minutes. Not bad. And so back to the future for a second. What do I think it's going to look like? I'm not sure that you really care, but I do think that it's going to be, I mean, I wrote this before I heard any of these other talks, and I think a lot of us are on the same page, that the future in computing is going to be in doing it yourself, moving away from the big platforms, conceiving, creating, and publishing for yourselves, and going back to the roots of the web. The future should be decentralized, offline, and hopefully as in-person as possible. But how do we get there? And that was the idea, by empowering people like you in this room right now and viewing the video in the future, hello future, to build this for yourselves. And what about the future of distribution that I talked about? The Twitter problem, like they say first-time founders focus on product and second-time founders focus on distribution. And that tells you distribution is more important than product, essentially. How people find out about your big idea is one of the big aspects of the persona that we talked about earlier. Like, if you don't know where you can reach these people, then do you really know the audience? And as to the future of it, I don't know. I'm unclear. I know that it's very important to figure out. I hope someone in this room is involved in helping figure that out. And is the future as decentralized, offline, and user-owned as we hope it will be? Then if so, we have the opportunity to build things more on our own terms, right? But not only that, in that world where we all own, and we're in control, being able to authentically communicate about the value of your big idea in that context is even more important. It will be even more challenging in a lot of ways. It'll be harder to cut through. And so that's why this matters even more. And the big idea is, don't need consultants like me, right? The future will be awesome when all of us take responsibility to the same extent for our communication as we do to the technical level of whatever that we're all striving for. And on that incredibly weak sentence, that's all I have for you. So thanks so much. Thanks you all for having me, and all the other speakers. Like I mentioned, you can go to our website and find a lot of this information. I'm happy to answer any questions if anyone has any. I'm also, one second, I think I'm also the only marketing consultant that also has an acknowledgement in the first or second edition of the type-driven development book that Edwin wrote a couple years ago. So I'm going to just go ahead and say that's probably true. Okay, yeah.
I think distribution is a really interesting question. I think we have a wave of change that we're in the middle of and coming towards. And I think just hand waving over that distribution, like there's a whole talk there that we have to have, right? Where there's a whole tech war of like, okay, we're going to point LLMs at marketing copy, and cold outreach, and we're going to create a custom landing page for every customer.
All of this puts like so much money in my pocket. I love it. It's great. I'm joking. Yeah. So, and
so like
comment on that is what you're saying, or what do? So okay. So, I did hand wave over it a little bit, but I will back up and say that it's not all that mysterious for a lot of people, right? A lot of times you do know where you can find some of these folks, whether or not you want to approach them on that level. Like, if you're not writing some language specific tooling, go to PyCon anyway, right? Go to any, the idea is to find as many of the people as you can in the places where you know where they're at, but it doesn't answer that specific question.
I'll give it more nuance. So, and is this the return of in-person? Are we going to sell 10 lobby booths at the 1,000-person Castle Islands next year? That's not a real thing, but imagine that there's an alternative version, the Casual Islands version.
Right. That's like more like a 3-year goal maybe. But I don't know. I mean, I was having a conversation with my friend David earlier, who was like, I didn't expect this kind of thing to come back. And I was like, I knew this was going to come back because I don't know really why, but it just is an essential aspect of the human experience. I think that people just really like being in a room with other people, and I'm kind of old, so maybe that's not like true for people that are, half my age. Maybe some of you in here might think completely differently about that, but I just don't see it going away. Do I think it's going to go back to like pre-pandemic crazy levels right away? No. But does it need to? No. And another thing is that this conference itself is sort of an interesting thing. It's a paradigm shift from 5 or 6 years ago. You see a lot more of these conferences that are sponsored by individual companies that are about their niche. And, whether or not that's effective for Fission's purposes is sort of an interesting question on its own, but I'm bullish on these kinds of things. I don't think they're going away. I think I would be sad for all the kids that never got to experience what I experienced, which is learning about something that you didn't think that you cared about. I mean, that's like the whole thing about knowledge, right? It's like you want to learn about a thing you didn't know you wanted to know about. So, Hi.
Hello.
Hi.
I'm curious if you would recommend any like modifications or something like that for people who might not know exactly what it is they're doing yet. Because like specifically, like there's questions like, who are we building this for, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I think a lot of places here are doing some really like fundamental research where it's like kind of even a question mark. Is it even possible to do the thing we're trying to do? And obviously the answer is, well, don't sell it until you know the answer, right?
Sure.
But like, is there a bridge between like, let's make a marketing website and we're still figuring out all these other pieces?
Absolutely. Yes. Great question. I think that something that I didn't mention explicitly is that this whole thing is like, you're ready to do all of this when you have a pretty clear idea of at least the problem statement, right? And like I hope this comes across. I'm 100% for exploratory research. I want everyone to do the cool thing that you want to do. It's awesome, and you and your homies think it's dope, and that's great. But that's just a different scenario than trying to get other people to use it, right? So I think that writing down your problem statement and thinking about the people should be a clarifying exercise for you early on in your research. And there's a great, there was an earlier version of this talk where I talked a lot more about like the differences between academia and industry. And I was like talking about like this and that. And I was like, but that doesn't matter because we all need help with the same thing anyway, And I like to think about like the Matt Might diagram, the PhD thing, where like, that's the idea. Like, has everyone seen that thing? It's a really cool graphic. And if you look up Matt Might,
We'll share it on the
PhD.
Discord.
Yeah. And
it's
anyway,
worth it.
it illustrates the idea that when you're doing academic research, all you really need to do is like push the tip of the spear out like ever so slightly, right? And it's got this great visualization of that. And when you're in that stage, that's not like, in some ways, academia is like overfits for who. Right. And they're so focused in on this like tiny thing that it's like no one has that problem. Right. Or they are able to solve it to some specific end, but but on the other hand, this is not tractable in any scale. We're just proving that this theoretically works. I love that stuff. It's really obviously essential and foundational. It's just a little bit early on for this kind of thing. So hopefully that helps.
Hey, thanks for the talk.
Sure.
I was going to ask if we could do 3 groups of 4. No, I have an actual question.
That was a good joke.
I know what the answer is. One, I think it's really useful having this framework, and I've written a bunch of notes about it. Because it's just great to be told in simple, dumb steps, you just do this and you do this, and But the one bit that feels light in that is, and you kind of alluded to it at various moments, is that channels, making a website still doesn't solve the problem of no one's coming. So is that part of this, or is that sort of a whole separate process?
It's sort of that's after this, right? So the idea is that we don't, we have a saying in marketing, we don't like to create leaky funnels, right? So the funnel concept is this many people come to your website, this many people read more than 3 seconds of it, this many people click a button, this many people, sign up, and then this many people, which is 0.0001% of all visitors, actually do the thing that you wanted them to do. So we don't want a leaky funnel, meaning we don't want to draw a bunch of attention to our idea and send people to some website that sucks and doesn't communicate what we're trying to communicate, because they're never going to give you a second chance. Okay? Let me repeat that. They are not going to give you a second chance. They're just not. It just doesn't happen. They might see you again 2 years later and be like, but it's tough, so you usually have one shot. And that's why we want you to have the right words in place before you start thinking about how you're going to get all the people there to begin with. So it's sort of a separate thing. But I would start small. Start with your community. Start with your Discord. Start with your user group. Start with where you have at least 5-10 people that you can communicate with this thing about effectively, and then move on from there.